Alright, we're recording right now. So you guys don't think aliens ever came to Earth before. I want to see just why not? Why don't you think they ever came?
Because if they can get to us, then we can get to them. Lake.
Well, no, I don't believe aliens have ever been to Earth, but there are countless explanations for that. I mean, first of all, there's the legions of tinfoil hat people in the world who believe that aliens are all of our world's governments. I mean, there are Larry the Cable Guy type Americans who seriously, unironically believe that Barack Obama is an alien in a human suit. And, like, I don't know, they're undecided on whether his wife is human, but they are decided that she is a man in a dress. Yeah, so that's one thing. Another thing is, like, you know, like in Star Trek, where it's like, oh, we can't contact the primitive civilizations. They're waiting for us to accomplish, like, a certain thing before they reveal themselves to us. So that's another thing.
So they got to reach that same level of technology before we even waste our time talking to them?
Well, yeah, that's the Star Trek principle, and that's like one theory as to why they don't communicate with us. Personally, I don't think interstellar travel is easy. I don't think it's like for even a super advanced civilization. I don't think it would really be worth it. It would take a lot of resources. I mean, there's all sorts of problems affiliated with light speed travel. Like apparently there's by current understanding of physics, it's basically impossible for like humans to survive traveling at light speed. But even if we could travel at light speed, I mean, like, the galaxy is, like, I don't know how long the galaxy is, but, like, you wouldn't be able to make it, like, very far within, like, a human lifespan just traveling at light speed. Although the flip side of that is that apparently there are Earth-like planets that are only, like, 4 to 20 light years away.
Mm-hmm. It's like 40 light years is, like, the closest one, I think. I can't remember. But it's fucking low. Even if we achieve light speed, it would still take us 40 years going at light speed constantly without a single day break almost.
Well, you know, I mean, no, I think they do believe now that there are Earth-like planets within like 4 to 5 light years of our solar system, but Earth-like is kind of a funny term because, you know, we don't actually know what these planets look like. We only, you know, the way we identify planets in other solar systems is like mostly when they just pass in front of the star and we're viewing that star through a telescope and we see that little orb pass through and it's like, oh look, there's a planet. That's why like most of the planets known about until recently were gas giants because those were the only ones big enough for us to notice. But, you know, I mean, we don't know we don't know what's required in order for abiogenesis to take place, which is the creation of life from non-living things. So you know, it's really impossible to say how likely life is to develop, even on an Earth-like planet that has water on its surface. It's really like impossible to know these things. And on top of that, like, yeah, okay, there could be aliens on other planets, but you know, think about the circumstances required in order for humans to get to the level of like technology and intelligence that we're at now. I mean, you know, something that like super intelligent dolphins would not be able to like travel into space. They don't have the physical prowess necessary to build things. I mean, and anything that lives in the water, like, you know, I mean, it's hypothesized that there are planets out there that are nothing but ocean. I mean, they probably wouldn't be able to build electrical things in the same way that we do. That would be another obstacle. But on top of that, like, you know, intelligent life, we don't know how rare that is for something to become as intelligent as a human. So, you know, and I mean, they talk about this in the Andromeda Strain, the book, and also I think they probably mention it in the movie. I don't know, I haven't seen the movie in like 10 years. That, you know, if we ever are to encounter aliens, most likely they're just going to be bacteria. And then, you know, it's slightly less likely that we'll find multicellular organisms, even less likely that we'll find, like, alien animals or alien plants. And, you know, it becomes exponentially less likely that we would find something that's comparable to us.
And would even want to visit us because if there's there's only just a few light years away just for a planet, like, they would have no reason to come here. Like, if why would they come here, just to study us? Like, they could study literally anything. That's like us looking at an ant. Like, oh, that's pretty interesting. We could look at. Some people want to look at ants all day and think, oh, they have a queen and their society works like this.
And another thing that's interesting is that approximately half of all stars in existence are red dwarf stars. Our sun is a yellow dwarf star. In order for a planet to be in the habitable zone, comparable to where Earth is relative to our star, it would have to be so close to the star that it would experience a phenomenon called tidal locking. The moon is tidal locked to Earth. That's why we only see one face of the moon ever. There's a dark side of the moon, there's a light side of the moon, and I mean that has nothing to do with day and night, but if Earth was a star and the moon was a planet, the side of the moon that we always see would be perpetual day, and the side we don't see would be perpetual night. That's the phenomenon that takes place on most Earth-like planets in existence statistically. So most life, in theory, on an Earth-like planet would only be able to live in a donut-shaped region on the daytime side of that planet. Because just because of the heat from the sun, the center of that side would be way too hot, and the outer regions would be way too cold. And they would also be bathed mostly in infrared light, which we can't even see. So I mean, there's hypotheses about black plants that would live on these planets, and I mean, I've read theories about there's migratory trees that live on these worlds, which I mean that's basically just science fiction at that point. But Earth, when you think about all these circumstances, is actually pretty rare. The whole day and night cycle and everything, there's just all sorts of things that would make life on other planets more difficult to accomplish. It's also believed that because some people think that the Earth only can have life on it because we have a moon. I don't know about that, but there are theories which are much more believable that intelligent life was able to evolve as quickly as it did, being several billion years, only because the moon creates the tides, which would have accelerated ocean life.
To have the water go in and out.
Yeah, which would have accelerated ocean life adapting to the land.
I heard of that. There might be something to that. Would you guys ever want to go with Elon Musk to Mars?
Hell no. Hell no.
Because some of those people, there was a huge number of people that signed signatures. They were like, look, it's a one-way trip. We're not fucking coming back. I just want to live on Mars because their idea is, I want to be a part of history.
See, living on Mars, trying to make a life on Mars would more or less be like trying to make a life on the moon. Humans can't live on Mars. Terraforming Mars is the fever dream of someone who has played way too much Halo, because Mars does not have a magnetosphere. Earth has a magnetosphere because we have a molten iron core. There's a giant magnetic field that reaches way out past the atmosphere, and it protects Earth from solar winds. Mars is believed to have a solid core, probably iron, and it doesn't have the magnetosphere. Its surface is constantly bombarded by radiation that would expunge all life. Human life on the surface of Mars would have to be in bubbles, basically. Mars. There are people who believe Mars has living organisms far beneath the surface of the planet, but I mean, if you're gonna live underground on Mars, you might as well try to make a life somewhere underground on Earth.
Yeah, it might be vacuum sealed, and that they say they definitely have water underneath there. There might be some bacteria or something like that.
There is water on Mars. It's mostly frozen. Well, no, I think it's all frozen. It might melt at some points, but
Think of the psychological impact that would have on someone being on a planet. They don't know what it's going to be like there. They're not going to be able to go back. That's the last time that they're ever going to see anybody. You don't have the internet, so you can't connect to the people that you love, that you miss, or anything. You're just out in space for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
you're stuck.
Mass suicides.
Yeah, it's gonna be like when people started going out in the Midwest, during dust bowls and stuff like that. They didn't have connection to other people. They were stuck in the middle of nowhere for months on end because they couldn't travel because of. I'm just using dust as an example, because it really impacted them traveling. and this is another planet. You can't even like travel back because you don't have the material.
Right. Yeah. That's another thing. I mean, I bet that would depend on how many people actually go there, and what kind of life they're able to build for themselves. I mean, I would bet my life, my soul, and everything that I love that people would bring a fuck ton of video games and shit like that. I'm sure they would make their own fun, but I think a lot of that's just, again, dependent on, like, if you had enough people building a society on Mars and they didn't all fucking die on the way there, that, like, it would almost be like the population of a city on Earth. People could probably find happiness. I mean, granted that, the gender ratio isn't too bad.
Yeah.
They got to figure out that whole planning situation. Like, I have trouble just planning things here. Like, I have a perfectly normal plant, sunshine all day, water it like once every other day, and still it fucking dies. But the cucumber plant, I don't know if you've seen it, but that shit is already getting cucumbers on it. And like last month, the thing was like this small. Now it's like devouring my fire escape. So. Yeah, I don't think people will be living on Mars in our lifetime just because of all the complications attached to it. I mean, maybe Elon Musk's son it's a boy, right? With the crazy fucking name that no one can pronounce. Maybe he'll figure it out. Elon's determined. He says that one of his lifelong dreams is to die on Mars.
Listen, Elon Musk was almost bald, and by sheer force of will, he has a full head of hair now. I mean, maybe he can do anything. So, yeah, maybe life on Mars. I mean, some people have more hopes for the moons of Jupiter, that like they're somehow hot underneath the ice, and people are like, oh, there's sea serpents under the ice.
Oh boy,
I don't know about that. But the big thing about life on other planets is we don't know how abiogenesis started on Earth, so we really can't begin to imagine the conditions on other worlds that could lead to the same thing. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people who think God is involved in all this. I read about a person not too long ago who believes that hell actually is the planet Venus. So, there's always these philosophical arguments regarding that. I don't think we will find multicellular alien life in our lifetime, and if we ever do, if we find even unicellular alien life in our lifetimes, it will be bacteria somewhere deep under the ground on Mars or something like that. I mean, there are theories that life can spread relatively easily within a solar system because apparently sometimes meteors will strike a planet, kick smaller asteroid debris things up into space, and then those things will find their way to another planet, and like 0.001% of all bacteria on that rock will survive, but that's all you need for it to just start growing.
Yeah.
So there are people who think that Earth life began on Mars, which I don't know about that, but it's something to think about.
Yeah. What about the idea that like, even if how would religion play a part in, like, let's say we, even if it's a bacteria, right, and that we find bacteria on Mars underground, like what would religious people think of that? What would their reaction be of that?
So I think there would be two overall responses. There would be the more skeptical people who would probably say that we brought the bacteria there unintentionally, like, oh, well, you sent these probes there and there's bacteria on everything we touch, so the Mars rover has Earth bacteria on it and they just started reproducing there. But I think the less fanatical response would be, who are you to say that God only made life on Earth?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I was in religious school all my life, and the teachers at my high school were actually pretty progressively thinking compared to the stereotypes about Christians that I remember one of my teachers once challenged a student who was like anti-evolution, procreationist, like, how do you know that evolution is not the work of God? So there's that, and
the teacher said that.
The teacher said that, and then I mean, you know, this isn't
Yeah.
people become more accepting of science. They come up with their own explanations. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find many Christians in this day and age who actually believe really any of the stories in the Bible. They're more like, oh well, those stories are meant to teach us lessons, and you know, it's not quite the mode of thinking that we had like 500 years ago when Giordano Bruno suggested that there might be other Earths out there in space, and they fucking imprisoned him. And
What year was that?
Fucking like 1500, I believe.
That's insane.
They talked about it in Cosmos, but I haven't watched Cosmos
That guy
in like 6
was
years.
that guy was like fucking 1500 years above.
Well, he had a dream that like he reached like the outer limits of the solar system, because you know we only knew about like 5 planets back then, and that like he opened the curtain and there were like other planets and other Earths out there, and he started suggesting to people that God may have made an infinite number of Earths, and they locked him away for that because it was heresy.
Multiverse.
What do they do with them?
Multiverse is an interesting thing. I don't know why anyone believes there are other versions of Earth. I mean, it's a very cute concept, but then again, I mean, when have we ever experienced evidence of another dimension? I mean, like
They discovered some weird thing recently in science news, and the title was like, scientists discovered some evidence that a multiverse does exist, and it was like the way atoms basically react. Like it was something about how like atoms like flow upwards always, but like the way they were like screwing around with it, they discovered that the atoms actually like floated in the opposite direction, and for whatever reason that kind of proved like, okay, atoms can go in different directions even though they're supposed to only go upwards. I have to look up the article,
okay.
but that was their evidence
I don't know
basically.
anything about that.
Even like Stephen Hawking like believes something about time travel and different dimensions and shit like that.
Yeah,
One of the smartest men in the world.
I don't know about time travel. I mean, if like, the thing is, if even you were able to travel back in time, you effectively would end up in a different version of reality, because if you went back in time to meet your past self, you could never actually meet your past self, because the moment you arrive there, that past version of yourself is instantly transformed into a version of you living in a reality where someone from the future suddenly fucking showed up. That didn't happen to you, so that's not you anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so people are like, oh, you went back in time and killed yourself. Yeah, but that wouldn't be you. That would be you in a version of reality where some fucker from the future showed up and fucking killed you. Like, you know, and you obviously didn't go through that. So it wouldn't be you. It would be like, almost like in, I think in Back to the Future, they're like, they draw the line on the board and like, oh, we got skewed into a different version of reality.
Yeah, it's like it's all dimensions.
Yeah, so you go back and you can't go back in time and become your own grandfather.
I don't think you can. I don't think time travel exists, but like
I don't believe time exists. I don't believe the Big Bang ever happened. But
Really?
yeah, I think everything has just always existed. You know, I mean, the Big Bang, and that's not just my own conjecture. There are plenty of physicists who believe, who actually know their shit, who think the Big Bang wasn't real. The Big Bang was actually conceptualized by a Catholic priest, not a scientist, and apparently a lot of people. You know, it's funny though, because people, they're like, oh, look at the cosmic background radiation. This is from the Big Bang. It's like, how the fuck do you know that's from a giant explosion? Like, come on.
They say that the Big Bang theory, let's say it was real, and that basically everything expands over billions and billions of years, and eventually it goes right back together again and it explodes constantly.
Yeah, that's the big crunch. I know, but it's like, but we could only have been observing the universe for like less than 100 years at the most. I mean, how could you possibly confidently say that everything in existence is moving away from each other? The Andromeda Galaxy is not moving away from us.
It's moving towards us.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's just... No, but here's something though. This is there is something called the intergalactic medium. All matter, half of all matter in existence, 50% of it, is just ionized hydrogen atoms floating in between galaxies. And there are some theories that this is the birthplace of stars, and that when you get enough stars, you get to have like micro galaxies, which eventually coalesce into larger galaxies. Not all galaxies are as big as the fucking Milky Way. You've got the Magellanic Clouds, which are like baby galaxies that orbit the Milky Way. Gravity is a very funny thing. Things crash into each other, sometimes they don't, sometimes they start orbiting each other. I mean, if everything was as simple as the Big Crunch, Earth would have crunched into the sun long before we ever got here.
They have this theory that I learned about in astronomy back at Hunter. And so what happened was, in this theory, I forgot the name of it, but they use raisins as an example. Like in a loaf of bread or some shit, right? So imagine you have a cluster of these raisins and you bake it, and then the bread starts to rise and it starts to expand, right? The same thing happens, but it's still a cluster. Like how you have clusters of galaxies, and you have local galaxies, and you have galaxy neighborhoods. And so it's like, while everything is starting to expand, there are still groups of these things together. And some start to gravitate towards one another, others start to pull apart. So it's really just like a mixture of like how gravity interacts with one another.
Yeah, no, gravity is a funny thing. I don't think it's really fully understood even by like real physicists who know their shit, not just people who are drinking on a podcast on YouTube.
Gravity's fucking fascinating. Imagine the idea of like just harnessing gravity, like just making some device that produces just a dial. There's just, you know, whatever 5G, 10G. We're not talking about the one that
science fiction. No, I mean they could accomplish Earth-like gravity on like a space station. You'd have to have like rotating sections, and like, you know, you stand on like, you know, sort of the outside. It would like simulate like Earth gravity that way. I mean they do describe that in a lot of like science fiction things.
And if we could, that's an indescribable fucking amount of money just to produce something like that. We could solve so many fucking problems with just like a dial. But man, if we ever get something like that, oh, I think we'd be done. That's like, I don't know which one would be more difficult, achieving light speed or like actually figuring out how to produce gravity. I don't know which one would be more difficult or more expensive to figure out. Probably light speed would be more expensive.
Light speed would be more expensive.
Well, I think there are people who say they can build probes that are capable of traveling 25% light speed, which means these so-called Earth-like planets that are only 4 light years away from us, we could visit them in 20 years. And then from that point, assuming they could send messages back at light speed, it would take another 4 years after that for us to actually see what's going on over there. But you know, I mean, there are so many issues with like humans just up and living on another planet. I mean, you'd have to have an atmosphere comparable to ours. The temperatures would be. I mean, there could be aliens viewing Earth right now saying, no, nothing could ever live there. It's way too cold. Like, you know, I mean,
they might be cold here.
Well, you know, because Earth-like life, you say it depends on. I mean, assuming it depends on liquid water. Water can be pretty fucking hot before it's not liquid anymore, you know, and assuming you have life that can adapt to that, we might be able to talk to each other. We might not be able to exist in the same room as each other because, you know, we're comfortable at temperatures that are like only like 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit above freezing. That might be insane to them.
Or oxygen. What if they breathe methane or something weird like that?
Well, see, one of the main reasons why scientists gravitate towards like Earth, like, you know, life, like depending on oxygen and water and stuff, is because they're extremely common elements. Well, water's not an element, but water's an extremely common compound. Oxygen is very low on the periodic table. Hydrogen is first on the periodic table. I forget what oxygen is. What is it, 16 or something? And carbon is like the lowest number on the periodic table that is able to make as many molecular bonds, or like it makes more molecular bonds than anything else that even within that range. And the lower something is on the periodic table, the more common it is. I mean, they say everything began as hydrogen, but then hydrogen started collecting, it became stars, and the giant stars exploded, and within these explosions you had all the other elements. And we know everything in existence is made of the same elements. I mean, all these planets out there, they're made of basically the same stuff that our planets are made of, and we know that by, I forget what it's called, but if you look at things through a lens, like different molecules will block different parts of the spectrum, and you can tell, like that's how they identified helium, I think, from the sun. Originally, that's why like helium was like the sun god. Or no, I think helium might have been named after Helios.
That sounds right. That sounds about right.
Yeah, and then there was, I mean, the ancient Greeks, they knew a lot of shit. They knew Earth was round. So Christopher Columbus was not the first to know that. He knew Earth was round, but he thought that it was about half the size of what it really is. So when he arrived in the Americas, he was like, "Yeah, I've definitely come far enough. This must be Japan."
Columbus thought he eventually they would just fall off the edge, didn't he? That's what a lot of them thought.
No,
he didn't.
I think peasants may have thought that. I think the people who didn't know anything may have thought that.
Yeah, man, he fucking went out there anyway.
No, well, I mean.
Well, he was trying to get to India.
Yeah, well, he was trying to establish a new trade route. He's like, I'm this crazy motherfucker named Chris Columbus. I'm gonna take my boat all the way around the dark side of the world, and I'm gonna be fucking rich when I come home, because then I'm gonna prove to you guys that you're all just a bunch of fucking pussies. All you gotta do is keep sailing.
That's right. He thought eventually they would just it's kind of fucking insane how you could look at a land, a piece of water, just go straight in that direction, and eventually you'll end up right back where you started. At the time, that's just that's.
Well,
they thought it was horseshit.
No one had any idea that the Americas were there. I mean, he thought Earth was half the size of what it is, and he's like, okay, it's not that long of a journey, so there you have it. But then what do you know? You've got a giant fucking continent in the way. And then, worse yet, you have this fucking bullshit called Central America that rose out of the ocean only a few million years ago. I mean, if that wasn't there, he could just sail between them and be like, alright, here we go. Central America fucked everything up. Africa used to be a very different place. Now, the whole North Africa is all desert, because when Central America rose out of the ocean, it fucked up the wind patterns, and then rain couldn't get to what we call the Sahara anymore, and then it became a fucking desert.
Central, wow, I didn't know that.
It's all because those two fucking America continents got way too close to each other and started pushing land up out of the ocean.
Oh man, that's insane. That brings my mind to how all the continents were all connected at some point. You ever seen one of those photos?
Yeah. Pangea.
Pangea, and eventually there will be Super Pangea, but nobody really knows what that will look like.
It'll just keep moving. Another million years from now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then people have different versions. They try to figure out what Pangea really looked like. They try to connect it perfectly, and then they're like, maybe it'll look this way or that way.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? We should end it on that note? Not bad, right?
Yeah, why not? Pangea, back when they taught us how to build pyramids, and by they I mean the aliens.
Yeah.
There's so many weird coincidences if someone just looks at them, the way I think the pyramid in Giza, I think, and it just looks directly upwards, and what was it and it was the coordinates were perfectly aligned with something else. Do you guys know what else?
It was with one of the
ancient people knew astronomy pretty well.
Yeah, it was with one of their constellations.
Yeah.
Not the Aztecs.
No,
the Mayans tried to do some shit
almost,
like that too.
Yeah, many cultures on Earth built step pyramids, and then pyramids were just like, oh, well, the step pyramid's ugly. I'm gonna make mine just go straight up,
Yeah.
People knew architecture back then. I mean, think about it. You're the richest guy around back then. You've got all these slaves. You've got nothing to do with your free fucking time. I'd probably start making them build crazy shit too.
Oh man, like a statue in your name or something.
Yeah, something to show I existed.
I'd do some cool shit. I wouldn't just paint a bunch of rocks to look like God's face. I would, I'd make something that people would remember. Leave my mark on this world before I turn to dust.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. All right, folks, we'll end it on there. Oh.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.